the means of reproduction are also an important part of whether these people persist in poverty or whether they manage to pull themselves out of poverty. And this is where, the control of the means of reproduction is a kind of Marxist-sounding argument. But at the end of the day, it's not all that different from what the economist was saying, right? That give people control over their reproduction, their fertility rates, chances are that they will choose to have fewer children, and chances are that that will be good not only for them in terms of economic well-being, but for society as a whole. Now, obviously that implies a bunch of things about the kinds of jobs that are available, about people's dispositions to limit their fertility, and we're going to try to tease some of those out here. But that's how he manages to make a kind of Marx-Malthus hybrid argument in the context of development in northeastern Brazil. And the reason it's an interesting article is precisely that he attempts that kind of synthesis of what are otherwise considered frequently to be utterly incompatible ways of thinking about these issues, right? Yeah? What did Malthus say about northeastern Brazil? Well, I mean, basically, the Malthusian part of this is the notion that a greater population is going to contribute to poverty, or is contributing to poverty, creates misery and vice, and that bringing down the rate of growth of the population is a prudent thing to do from the perspective of both the well-being of the society and also the resources that are needed to support people. Okay? All right, let's move forward with this. I want to talk now about the U.S. and questions of fertility and wages here. So a couple years ago, the New York Times, reporting on a Census Bureau report, said, as women have children later than ever and more work outside the home, they are also working longer into pregnancy and returning to work faster than they did 4 decades ago. The trend reflects a number of developments since the early 1960s, including more opportunities for pregnancy leave, paid and unpaid, and increased protections for pregnant women against job discrimination. In the early part of that decade, the 1960s, 44% continued to work during pregnancy. That rose to 67% among women who gave birth to their first child between 2001 and 2003. The share who quit work before or after giving birth dropped to 25% from about 36% in the late 1980s. Comparable data from the 60s was not available. Nearly half took paid leave. Fewer than 4% said they were fired from their jobs before or after giving birth. Fully 80% of the women who worked during their pregnancy from 2001 to 2003 continued to do so into the last month of pregnancy, compared with 35% in 1961 to 65. In the early part of this decade, 55% returned to work within 6 months after giving birth. That figure was 14% in the early 1960s. The share who said they returned to work at lower pay declined to just under 2% in the latest period, from a little more than 4% in the early 1990s. College graduates were more likely to work during pregnancy, as were non-Hispanic white women. The census analysis of maternity leave and employment said the percent of first births to women 30 and older increased sharply from 24% in 2000 to 24% in 2000 from 4% in 1970. I would like you to chat with your neighbors for 4 minutes about what this says. What do these trends say to you about the nature of childbearing, child rearing, pregnancy in the United States and decisions about fertility? You've got 4 minutes. Okay. What did you come up with? What's going on in the last 50 years in the U.S.? Yeah. Okay, a lot of social change, like what? Okay, so we see evidence here that work has become increasingly the norm for women, even, well, regardless of decisions about having children, right? More women are working while they're pregnant, more women are continuing to work after they have a baby. What else? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so college graduates are more likely to work during pregnancy, as were non-Hispanic white women. Generally speaking, this would suggest that the people who are better educated and therefore better off, likely to be making more money, are more likely to be continuing to work through and after their pregnancies, which implies that they can afford to find other ways of having their children looked after, correct? How about you?
Nowadays, as women are becoming more equal to men, more women are no
Okay, so the overall trend appears to be more women have got more professional responsibilities and aspirations. What else? You had something?
This isn't like as big of a deal, but the cultural implication that's to the line of that I understood that non-pregnant white women also more likely to work during pregnancy. I know at least in the context of my own family, culturally, a woman should be working when she's pregnant, regardless of our economic status. Like the culture believes that a pregnant woman should be out of that system.
Okay.
I know that for me.
Okay. The more traditional perspective that perhaps it's okay for women to work, but once they start having children, it's not as appropriate. It's not as appropriate for a pregnant woman to work outside the home. It's not as appropriate for a woman with children, young children in particular, to work outside the home. That traditional belief, if we want to call it that, appears to be eroding or losing sway over the decisions of a lot of women. Yeah. Okay, the last figure here, the last piece of information provided is perhaps one of the most striking ones, that the number of women who wait until age 30 or later to have a child is significantly increased from what it was before. 24% instead of 4% of women are waiting until after 30 to have a child. That has enormous implications for the overall number of children that they're likely to have, as we know from before, and it also clearly is linked to this growing participation in the workforce. Yeah?
I think that also women 30 and older are having more children in general because of better screening techniques, so they can detect, so it's better to detect early on if there's an illness in child.
Okay, we don't know if that's a big part of this. That's a possibility. That that's another aspect of this growing control over decisions about children, is whether you can actually find out early in a pregnancy whether there are any genetic or other problems with the child, and that might contribute to later childbearing. Yeah.
The last one, I feel that a lot of the significance comes from that women and just people in general are getting married later in life versus earlier in age, like they used to, people who just have things.
Okay. Okay. We don't see anything in here about age of marriage, but we do know from other sources that the age of marriage is higher than it probably was 50 years ago. You.
I'd say overall that maybe standards of living that their country requires them to work more.
Okay. There's a number of different ways you can read all of this information. One is that women are becoming more prominent in the workplace, that opportunities for them in the workplace are increasing, that ways of balancing childbearing and child rearing with employment and professional aspirations have developed so that a lot of women have opportunities that just weren't there 50 years ago. On the other hand, as is suggested here, you have to ask, well, what's motivating the decision to work? Is it professional aspirations in the sort of purely positive sense, or is it necessity? Is it the fact that you can't raise children or support a household in a lot of places unless both adults in the household are working? Did you have something?
Yeah, no,
Okay. How did you know what the slides are going to be? I didn't post them ahead of time. Let's ask this question about real wages. What's going on to motivate increased female participation in the workforce? This is hourly earnings of private production and non-supervisory workers in real dollars, 2001 dollars, from 1947 to 2001. And we see a steady increase from about 1947, from the beginning, up until about 1973 or 74. And then it plateaus, declines somewhat through into the middle 1990s, and climbs, but is still basically no higher today than it was in 1973. We can look at this in terms of nominal and real hourly wages. This is 1964 to 2005. So in terms of nominal wages, we see an increase from 2.25 up to 16.50 or something like that in terms of average hourly wages. But that's just the nominal wage. If you actually correct for inflation and ask what is the real purchasing power of those wages, we see remarkable stagnation. Now, it's interesting how to reconcile those two graphs. There may be some interesting differences in the data, because previously we saw an increase that continued there through the late 60s, which is not reflected here. We can break this out in terms of productivity as well as wages. So here, this is 2000 to 2006, what is that? I guess that's actually a 5, so that's 2006. And you see that real compensation increased not by an increase in the real wage, but as a byproduct of an increase in productivity, which is to say that as the productivity of U.S. laborers on average increased, what that means is that the price of goods on average declines because they can be produced more cheaply. So that a real wage that is flat, corrected for inflation, does yield something of an increase in purchasing power, real compensation. You have a question? I believe here we're talking about purchasing power. There may be some other things in terms of other benefits, but I'm not sure. I would need to dig into this more thoroughly. The point I'm trying to drive home is that production increases, productivity gains, did not translate into higher wages in the U.S. over this time period. Yes?
In a Marxist sense, isn't this pretty much heaven for the capitalists?
I don't think you have to be Marxist to recognize that it's heaven for the capitalists.
Well, yeah. I mean, because it's like people appear that they're making more, but they really aren't.
It makes it, yeah. There is the illusion of economic progress or gains for the average person that are in fact either a product of inflation or a product of growing productivity. The returns from growing productivity are not directly translated into wages. If you benefit from them, it's only indirectly through declines in the cost of things like cell phones. You know, yeah.
Plus, the amount of debt that average consumers are in Western years.
Right. We aren't even looking here at debt loads, which are an important part of calculating household net worth. Certainly. Did you have something else? Yeah.
What exactly is real compensation?
I should get back to you on that. Exactly. In this case, what exactly does real compensation refer to? Does it include anything about benefits, for example, or retirement schemes or things like that? My initial sense is this is a way of recognizing that rising productivity does lead to some kind of compensation in terms of purchasing power that is independent of inflation. Does that make sense? But I'm not sure. I should actually look into this further. I went back looking for this graph on the web and was not able to find it again. So I may or may not be able to dig into it for this particular case. Just to point out that this is not the case everywhere. They're right next door in Canada. The gains in productivity have not gone unreflected in wages in the way that they have in the United States. All of this is to suggest again that, in thinking about, in this case, decisions about fertility, and women's decisions about when to have a baby, whether to have, whether to continue working during pregnancy, after pregnancy, that sort of thing, it's going to depend on a lot of considerations, and one of them is precisely this question of real wages. Do you need your job? How much do you need your job? How bad do you need your job? Somewhere recently I read something that, you know, the phenomenon of professional women deciding that in fact having a child and raising it and being a full-time mom is more fulfilling, and they are voluntarily giving up their careers and going back to it. And apparently there's a lot of, you know, talk about how cool this is and how this is real women's liberation, and that all that talk about breaking into the workforce was not actually that great from a feminist perspective, that sort of thing. Well, somebody actually started looking at the numbers more closely and determined that the women who are giving up their careers to raise their children are almost entirely women who are so wealthy that giving up their careers does not make a dent in their household well-being or income. You know, they may have had high-paying jobs, but chances are so did their dad, and so does their husband, and so does their entire, you know, basically they've got enough money in the bank that they can choose to mother as a kind of statement about their lifestyle or whatever. Not saying that they don't genuinely feel attached, but just that this is not some kind of post-feminist, whatever, new dawn. Anyway, we will see you on Tuesday, and we will get you the midterm questions tomorrow. Thank you.